Sometimes the quietest person in the room carries the loudest secrets. In military training camps around the world, strength is measured by how fast you can run, how many push-ups you can do, and how well you follow orders. But what happens when the weakest recruit in the entire battalion turns out to be connected to the most powerful commander in the military? What happens when a simple tattoo reveals a truth that changes everything everyone thought they knew? This is the story of Sarah Chun, a 19-year-old girl who entered basic training weighing barely 110 pounds, struggling to keep up with physical demands, and facing daily mockery from her fellow recruits. They called her Ghost because she was so thin and pale. They laughed when she fell behind during morning runs. They rolled their eyes when she struggled with the obstacle course. But none of them knew about the small tattoo hidden beneath her sleeve. None of them knew about the connection that would silence an entire room of hardened soldiers. None of them knew that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought with physical strength, but with the quiet determination that burns inside someone who has already survived more than most people could imagine. This is a true story about prejudice, hidden strength, and the moment when everything everyone believed about weakness and power got turned completely upside down. Sarah Chun stepped off the military bus at Fort Braxton on a cold Tuesday morning in March, carrying a duffel bag that looked too big for her small frame. At 19 years old, she stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighed 110 pounds soaking wet. Her black hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her dark eyes held a mixture of determination and nervousness that she tried hard to hide. The other recruits getting off the bus were a mixed group, but most of them looked like they belonged there. There was Marcus Williams, a former high school football player from Texas who stood 6 feet 2 and had arms like tree trunks. Jessica Rodriguez had been a track star in college and moved with the easy confidence of someone who had never met a physical challenge she couldn't handle. Then there was Tommy Sullivan, who had grown up on a farm and could probably lift a truck if he needed to. Sarah looked around at her fellow recruits and felt her stomach drop. She had known this would be difficult, but seeing the competition in person made everything feel more real and more impossible at the same time. Welcome to hell, ladies and gentlemen. Drill Sergeant Martinez's voice cut through the morning air like a knife. He was a stocky man with graying hair and eyes that seemed to see everything at once. For the next 12 weeks, this place will be your home, your school, and your worst nightmare all rolled into one. Some of you will make it through. Some of you will not. The question is, which one are you going to be? Sarah gripped her duffel bag tighter and tried to stand up straighter. She had been preparing for this moment for months, running every morning, doing push-ups in her tiny apartment, studying military procedures until her eyes burned. But standing here now, surrounded by people who looked like they were born for this life, she wondered if all her preparation would be enough. The first few hours were a whirlwind of paperwork, medical checks, and room assignments. Sarah found herself sharing a bunk with 3 other female recruits. Her bunkmate directly across from her was Jessica, the former track star, who looked at Sarah with barely concealed skepticism. "You sure you're in the right place?" Jessica asked as Sarah struggled to make her bed according to military standards. "No offense, but you look like a strong wind could knock you over." Sarah's cheeks burned, but she kept working on her bed sheets. "I'm stronger than I look," she said quietly. "Uh-huh," Jessica replied, but her tone suggested she didn't believe it for a second. The real test came that afternoon during their first physical training session. Drill Sergeant Martinez lined all the recruits up on the track that circled the main training field. "We're going to start with a simple 2-mile run," he announced. "Nothing fancy, just to see what we're working with. You will run together as a unit, and you will finish together as a unit. That means nobody gets left behind." Sarah's heart started pounding before they even began. She had been running regularly, but 2 miles was still a challenge for her, especially trying to keep up with people who were naturally faster and stronger. The whistle blew, and the group took off. Within the first quarter mile, Sarah was already falling behind. Her breathing became labored, and her legs felt like they were made of lead. Marcus and Tommy were leading the pack, making it look easy. Jessica was right behind them, barely breaking a sweat. Sarah found herself at the very back, struggling to maintain even a slow jog. "Come on, Chun," Drill Sergeant Martinez shouted as he ran alongside the group. "You're holding everyone back." The other recruits started looking over their shoulders, and Sarah could see the frustration in their faces. They were being forced to slow down because of her, and nobody was happy about it. "I don't know why they even let people like her in," she heard Marcus mutter to Tommy. "She's going to get people killed if she ever makes it to real combat." Sarah's face burned with shame, but she kept running. Her lungs felt like they were on fire, and her legs were shaking, but she refused to stop. She had come too far and sacrificed too much to give up now. By the time they finished the 2-mile run, Sarah was nearly collapsing. She crossed the finish line a full 2 minutes after everyone else, gasping for air and fighting back tears of frustration. "That was pathetic," Drill Sergeant Martinez said, looking directly at her. "Absolutely pathetic. In combat, being slow doesn't just mean you lose a race. It means people die. Do you understand that, Chun?" "Yes, sir," Sarah managed to gasp out between breaths. "I don't think you do," he replied. "But maybe you'll figure it out before you wash out of my program." The rest of the day didn't get any better. During weapons training, Sarah struggled to handle the weight of the rifle. Her small hands had trouble gripping it properly, and her arms shook from the effort of holding it steady. During the obstacle course, she couldn't pull herself over the wall that everyone else cleared easily. She got stuck on a rope climb and had to be helped down. By dinner time, Sarah felt like she had been beaten up by a professional boxer. She sat alone at one end of a long table in the mess hall, picking at her food and trying not to listen to the conversations happening around her. "I give her a week," she heard Jessica say to another recruit. "Maybe 2 if she's really stubborn." "I don't even know how she passed the physical requirements to get in," Marcus added. "They must be lowering standards or something." Sarah stared down at her plate and tried to block out their words. She knew they weren't trying to be cruel, just realistic. But it still hurt to hear her fears spoken out loud by people who barely knew her. That night, as she lay in her narrow bunk listening to the other recruits sleep, Sarah rolled up the sleeve of her nightshirt and looked at the small tattoo on her upper arm. It was simple and elegant, just a few lines that formed a symbol most people wouldn't recognize. She traced it with her finger and remembered the day she had gotten it, remembered the promise she had made, remembered why she was here in the first place. She had not told anyone about her past. During the intake process, she had answered all the required questions honestly, but volunteered no extra information. As far as her fellow recruits knew, she was just another young woman who had decided to join the military. They didn't know about the scholarship money she had turned down to be here. They didn't know about the family she had left behind or the promises she had made. They didn't know about the real reason she had chosen this path. The next morning brought more of the same. Sarah struggled through morning exercises, fell behind during the run, and made mistakes during drill practice. The other recruits' patience was wearing thin, and even the ones who had tried to be encouraging at first were starting to show frustration. "Look, Sarah," Jessica said after a particularly difficult training session, "maybe this just isn't for you." There's no shame in admitting that. Lots of people try military life and realize it's not the right fit. "I'm not quitting," Sarah replied firmly. "But you're making it harder for all of us," Marcus interjected. "When you can't keep up, the whole unit suffers. We're only as strong as our weakest link, and right now that's you." Sarah felt her cheeks burn again, but she met Marcus's eyes directly. "Then help me get stronger instead of just complaining about it." Marcus laughed, but it wasn't a kind sound. "Some things can't be taught, Chun. Some people are just built for this life, and others aren't." Over the following weeks, Sarah's struggles continued, but so did her determination. She got up an hour earlier than everyone else to practice on the obstacle course. She ran extra laps when no one was looking. She studied military procedures until her eyes burned from exhaustion. But despite all her extra effort, she continued to be the slowest, the weakest, the one who held everyone back. The other recruits started calling her Ghost because she was so thin and pale, and because she seemed to fade into the background during group activities. Some of them had given up on her entirely, treating her like she was already gone. Others made jokes about her inability to keep up, though they tried to be subtle about it when the drill sergeants were around. Sarah endured it all with quiet determination. She had learned long ago how to handle being underestimated, how to push through when everyone around her expected her to fail. She had been the smallest kid in her school, the one teachers overlooked, the one other students assumed couldn't handle difficult challenges. But she had surprised them then, and she was determined to surprise everyone here too. The only problem was that military training was unlike anything she had ever faced before. The physical demands were brutal, and no amount of mental toughness could make up for the fact that she simply didn't have the natural strength and speed that seemed to come so easily to her fellow recruits. 3 weeks into training, Sarah's position as the unit's weakest member was solidified during a particularly challenging exercise. They were practicing combat scenarios in a mock village that had been built on the base. The exercise required them to move quickly and quietly through the buildings while completing various objectives. Sarah's group was assigned to secure a building and extract a hostage played by another recruit. The mission should have taken 15 minutes. It took them nearly 30 because Sarah couldn't keep up with the pace required for the scenario. She moved too slowly, made too much noise, and at one point got completely lost and had to be found by her teammates. When they finally completed the exercise, Drill Sergeant Martinez gathered the entire unit for a debriefing. His face was grim as he looked around the circle of recruits. "That was the worst performance I've seen in 15 years of training soldiers," he said, his voice deadly calm. "In a real combat situation, every single one of you would be dead right now. And do you want to know why?" The recruits remained silent, but Sarah could feel their eyes on her. "Because one weak link can destroy an entire chain," Martinez continued. "In war, you move at the speed of your slowest member. You're only as effective as your least capable soldier. And right now, that means this entire unit is compromised." Sarah felt her face burning with shame, but she forced herself to stand up straighter and meet the drill sergeant's gaze. She had been humiliated before, and she had survived it. She would survive this too. After the debriefing, Sarah found herself alone on the track, running laps in the fading evening light. She had started doing this every night, pushing herself to run farther and faster than she had the day before. The track was empty except for her, and the only sound were her footsteps hitting the asphalt and her labored breathing. She was on her 4th lap when she heard footsteps behind her. She looked over her shoulder and saw Drill Sergeant Martinez jogging to catch up with her. "Mind if I join you, Chun?" he asked as he fell into step beside her. Sarah was surprised but nodded. "Of course, sir." They ran together in silence for nearly half a mile before Martinez spoke again. "You know, I've been watching you for 3 weeks now," he said, his voice less harsh than usual. "You're the worst recruit I've had in terms of physical ability, but you're also the most determined." Sarah didn't know how to respond to that, so she kept running. "Most people would have quit by now," Martinez continued. "Hell, most people would have quit after the first week. But here you are, still showing up, still trying. Why?" Sarah considered the question as they rounded another corner of the track. "Because I have to be here, sir," she finally said. "This isn't just something I want to do. It's something I need to do." Martinez glanced at her. "Need to do? That's interesting. Mind if I ask why?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. She had been keeping her reasons private, but there was something about running in the gathering darkness with this man who had been so hard on her that made her want to tell the truth. "I made a promise, sir," she said quietly, "to someone very important to me, and I don't break promises." Martinez nodded slowly. "Fair enough. But you should know that promises won't keep you alive in combat, Chun. And they won't keep your teammates alive either." "I know that, sir. That's why I'm out here running extra laps instead of sleeping." They completed another lap in silence before Martinez stopped running. Sarah stopped too, breathing hard, but not as hard as she would have 3 weeks ago. "I'm going to give you some advice, Chin," Martinez said, looking directly at her. "And you can take it or leave it, but I suggest you think about it carefully. Yes, sir. You're trying to become something you're not. You're trying to be as fast as Williams, as strong as Sullivan, as natural as Rodriguez. But that's never going to happen. Your body just isn't built that way. Sarah felt her heart sink, thinking he was about to tell her to quit. But Martinez continued, that doesn't mean you can't be valuable. Some of the best soldiers I've ever known weren't the strongest or the fastest. They were the smartest, the most determined, the ones who found ways to compensate for what they lacked in raw ability. He paused and studied her face in the dim light. The question is, are you smart enough and determined enough to figure out how to be useful despite your limitations? Or are you going to keep trying to be something you're not until you wash out of my program? Sarah thought about his words as she made her way back to the barracks. She had been so focused on trying to keep up physically that she hadn't really considered other ways she might contribute. But Martinez was right. She would never be the strongest or fastest, no matter how hard she trained. That night, she lay in her bunk thinking about what he had said. She traced the tattoo on her arm again and remembered the conversation that had led her to get it, remembered the person who had taught her that strength came in many different forms. Maybe it was time to stop trying to be like everyone else and start figuring out how to be the best version of herself. The next morning, Sarah woke up before the alarm, as had become her habit. But instead of heading straight to the track for extra running practice, she went to the base library. She had noticed it during their first week tour, but hadn't had time to visit until now. The librarian, an older woman with kind eyes and graying hair, looked surprised to see a recruit so early in the morning. Can I help you find something, dear? I need books on military strategy, Sarah said, and combat tactics, especially anything about small unit operations and unconventional warfare. The librarian raised an eyebrow, but led Sarah to the appropriate section. Doing some extra studying? Something like that, Sarah replied, pulling several thick books from the shelves. Over the next week, Sarah developed a new routine. She still got up early to run, but she also spent hours reading about military history, studying famous battles, and learning about different tactical approaches. She read about how smaller, weaker forces had defeated larger, stronger ones throughout history. She studied the tactics used by special forces units that relied on intelligence and strategy rather than brute force. During training exercises, Sarah started paying attention to different things. Instead of just trying to keep up physically, she began analyzing the tactical situations they were put in. She noticed patterns in how the drill sergeants designed the exercises, weaknesses in their defensive positions, and opportunities for creative solutions that her fellow recruits were missing. The breakthrough came during a night training exercise in their 5th week. The recruits were divided into 2 teams for a capture the flag scenario in the wooded area behind the base. Sarah's team was assigned to defend their flag, which was positioned in a clearing surrounded by trees. Marcus, who had naturally taken on a leadership role, positioned most of the team in a defensive perimeter around the flag. Chun, you stay here with the flag, he said. If anyone gets through, just yell for help. Sarah watched as her teammates spread out to defensive positions, and she noticed something that made her stomach drop. They were setting up exactly the way the training manual suggested, which meant the attacking team would know exactly how to counter their defensive strategy. She studied the terrain around their position and realized there was a drainage ditch that ran along the eastern edge of the clearing. It was partially hidden by overgrown grass, and in the darkness, it would provide perfect concealment for an attacking force. Her teammates had missed it completely because they were focused on the obvious approaches. Sarah made a decision that she knew would either prove her worth or get her in serious trouble. Instead of staying with the flag as ordered, she quietly made her way to the drainage ditch and positioned herself where she could observe anyone trying to use it as a concealed approach. She didn't have to wait long. 20 minutes into the exercise, she saw movement in the ditch. 3 members of the attacking team were crawling through it, planning to emerge directly behind the defensive perimeter. If they succeeded, they would be able to take the flag while her teammates were still watching the obvious approaches. Sarah had 2 choices. She could call out to alert her team, but that would reveal her position and might not be fast enough. Or she could try to stop the attackers herself, even though she was outnumbered 3-1. She chose the second option. As the first attacker emerged from the ditch, Sarah was waiting for him. She had positioned herself behind a fallen log, and when he stood up, she tackled him around the waist, knocking him off balance and sending him tumbling back into the ditch. The second attacker tried to climb out, but Sarah was ready for him too. She grabbed a thick branch and used it to tangle his legs, causing him to fall backwards onto his teammate. The third attacker was smarter. He waited until Sarah was focused on the other two, then tried to circle around her position. But Sarah had anticipated this. She had placed several loose rocks in strategic positions, and when she heard him approaching, she kicked one of them into his path. In the darkness, he tripped over it and went down hard, his equipment clattering loudly enough to alert the defensive perimeter. By the time her teammates arrived to investigate the noise, Sarah had successfully neutralized the entire attacking force that had been trying to use the concealed approach. Marcus stared at the scene in amazement. "Chin, what the hell are you doing over here? You were supposed to stay with the flag." "I saw the ditch," Sarah explained, breathing hard but feeling more confident than she had since arriving at the base. "I knew they would use it to flank our position. The defensive perimeter you set up was good for stopping frontal attacks, but it left us vulnerable to this approach." Jessica, who had arrived with the others, looked from Sarah to the three defeated attackers and back again. "You took down 3 people by yourself?" "I used the terrain to my advantage," Sarah said, "and I studied their approach patterns during previous exercises. Tommy always tries to flank left, Marcus prefers direct assault, and Rodriguez likes to find concealed routes. I figure whoever was on the attacking team would probably use similar strategies." The exercise continued for another hour, but Sarah's tactical insight had disrupted the attacking team's primary strategy, and her team successfully defended their flag. As they walked back to the barracks, the other recruits looked at her differently than they had before. "That was actually pretty smart," Tommy admitted grudgingly. "I never would have thought to watch that ditch." "Where did you learn to think like that?" Jessica asked. Sarah shrugged. "I've been reading about military tactics, trying to figure out how to contribute something other than slowing everyone down." The next morning, Drill Sergeant Martinez pulled Sarah aside after physical training. "I heard about last night's exercise," he said. "Interesting approach you took." "I hope I didn't break any rules, sir," Sarah replied nervously. "You disobeyed a direct order from your team leader," Martinez said, and Sarah's heart sank. "But you also demonstrated tactical thinking that none of your teammates showed. You identified a weakness in their defensive strategy and took initiative to address it." He paused and studied her face. "Tell me, Chun, what did you see that the others missed?" Sarah took a deep breath and explained her analysis of the terrain, her observations of her teammates' tactical preferences, and her reasoning for positioning herself in the drainage ditch. Martinez listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he nodded slowly. "Have you ever considered military intelligence as a career field?" Sarah looked surprised. "I thought all recruits were being trained for basic infantry, sir." "Most are," Martinez agreed. "But the military has many different roles, and not all of them require you to be the fastest runner or the strongest soldier. Some require you to be smart, observant, and able to think strategically under pressure." He handed her a folder. "These are some materials on military intelligence training. Look them over and let me know if you're interested. Your physical training will continue regardless, but this might be a way for you to contribute your strengths while still serving." That evening, Sarah sat on her bunk reading through the materials Martinez had given her. Military intelligence officers were responsible for gathering and analyzing information about enemy forces, terrain, and tactical situations. They worked with technology, studied patterns, and provided strategic recommendations to commanders. It sounded perfect for someone who was better at thinking than fighting. Jessica noticed her reading and came over to look at the folder. "Intelligence? That's actually pretty cool. Are you thinking about switching tracks?" "Maybe," Sarah said. "I mean, I'm obviously not cut out to be infantry." "Hey," Jessica said, sitting down on the edge of Sarah's bunk, "I owe you an apology. I've been pretty hard on you since we got here, and I was wrong. What you did last night was impressive. You saw something none of the rest of us saw, and you acted on it." Sarah looked up, surprised by the genuine tone in Jessica's voice. "I guess I assumed that physical strength was the only thing that mattered here," Jessica continued. "But you proved that wrong. Smart beats strong sometimes." Over the next few days, word of Sarah's tactical success spread through the recruit unit. The other recruits started asking her opinion on training exercises, and she found herself being included in strategy discussions that she had been excluded from before. During a complex multi-team exercise that weekend, Marcus actually asked Sarah to analyze the scenario before they began. "What do you think, Chun? What are we missing?" Sarah studied the map they had been given and noticed that there was a water tower positioned at one corner of the training area. "If we could get someone up there, they would have visual on the entire area," she said. "We could coordinate all our movements from that position." "But how do we get up there without being seen?" Tommy asked. Sarah pointed to a series of maintenance tunnels marked on the map. "These run underground between most of the buildings. If we could access them here, we could move unseen to the base of the water tower." The plan worked perfectly. Sarah's teammate positioned herself in the water tower, was able to coordinate their movements throughout the exercise, and their team completed their objectives faster than any team had before. Even the drill sergeants were impressed. "Outstanding tactical thinking," Drill Sergeant Rodriguez announced during the debriefing. "Whoever came up with the water tower strategy showed real intelligence awareness." Marcus looked over at Sarah and smiled. "That was all Chin's idea, sir." Sarah felt her cheeks flush, but this time it was from pride rather than embarrassment. As the weeks passed, Sarah's role in the unit continued to evolve. She still struggled with the physical aspects of training, but her teammates had stopped seeing her as dead weight. Instead, they came to rely on her analytical skills and tactical insights. During weapons training, Sarah discovered that while she couldn't handle the heavier equipment as easily as her teammates, she had excellent accuracy with smaller weapons. Her steady hands and careful attention to detail made her one of the best marksmen in the unit. "Turns out being small has its advantages," she told Jessica after a particularly successful day at the shooting range. "Less muscle mass means less tremor in my hands." Sarah also excelled at map reading and navigation. While other recruits struggled with compass headings and terrain analysis, Sarah found it intuitive. She could look at a topographical map and immediately visualize the actual landscape, identifying the best routes and potential obstacles. During a survival training exercise, Sarah's navigation skills saved her team from getting lost in the woods. When their compass malfunctioned, she was able to use the position of the sun and the terrain features to guide them back to base. "How did you know which way to go?" Marcus asked as they emerged from the woods. "The map showed a ridgeline running north-south about 2 miles east of base," Sarah explained. "I could see it through the trees, so I knew we needed to head west to get back." "I couldn't even see the ridgeline," Tommy admitted. "You have to know what to look for," Sarah said. "And you have to trust the information you have instead of panicking when something goes wrong." By the 8th week of training, Sarah had found her place in the unit. She was still the slowest runner and struggled with heavy lifting, but she had proven her value in other ways. Her teammates had stopped making jokes about her physical limitations and started appreciating her intellectual contributions. More importantly, Sarah had stopped trying to be someone she wasn't. She still worked hard to improve her physical fitness, but she no longer saw it as her primary value to the team. She had learned to leverage her strengths instead of dwelling on her weaknesses. One evening, as she was studying intelligence procedures in the library, Drill Sergeant Martinez found her there. "Working late again, Shun?" he asked. "Yes, sir. I'm reading about signal intelligence gathering techniques." Martinez sat down across from her. "You've come a long way since that first day. Your teammates have noticed." "Thank you, sir. I'm trying to find ways to contribute." "You're doing more than contributing," Martinez said. "You're adding value that wasn't there before. Before you started thinking tactically, this unit was just a collection of physically capable individuals. Now, they're starting to function like an actual team." Sarah looked up from her book, surprised by the compliment. "I've been training recruits for 15 years, Martinez continued. I've seen a lot of different types come through here. The ones who succeed aren't always the strongest or the fastest. The ones who succeed are the ones who figure out how to be useful and how to make everyone around them better. He paused and looked directly at her. You figure that out, Chun. And that's why I think you're going to make an excellent soldier, even if you're not the kind of soldier I thought you were going to be when you first got here. As Sarah walked back to the barracks that night, she felt something she hadn't felt since arriving at the base. She felt like she belonged. She had found her place in this world, not by becoming someone else, but by learning how to be the best version of herself. She still had 4 more weeks of basic training ahead of her, and she knew there would be more challenges. But for the first time since stepping off that bus 2 months ago, she felt confident that she could handle whatever came next. She thought about the small tattoo hidden beneath her sleeve and smiled. The person who had inspired her to get would be proud of how far she had come. But more importantly, Sarah was proud of herself. Week 9 brought a new challenge that would test everything Sarah had learned about herself and her place in the unit. Drill Sergeant Martinez announced that they would be participating in a week-long field exercise that would simulate real combat conditions. This is not a game, he told the assembled recruits. For the next 7 days, you will be living in the field, eating field rations, and operating as if you were in actual combat. You will face unexpected challenges, equipment failures, and scenarios designed to push you beyond your comfort zone. He paused and looked around the group. More importantly, you will be rotating leadership responsibilities. Each of you will have the opportunity to lead the unit for a full day. Your performance during these leadership rotations will be a major factor in your final evaluation. Sarah's stomach dropped. She had found her place as a tactical advisor and strategic thinker, but leading? That required a different kind of confidence, a different kind of authority that she wasn't sure she possessed. The exercise began on Monday morning. They were transported to a remote area of the base that had been set up to simulate a foreign environment. Their mission was to establish a forward operating base, conduct reconnaissance of enemy positions, and complete various objectives over the course of the week. Marcus was assigned as the first day's leader, which surprised no one. He was natural at giving orders and had the physical presence that made people want to follow him. Under his leadership, they established their base camp efficiently and completed their first set of objectives without major problems. Tuesday was Jessica's turn. She brought a different style to leadership, focusing on teamwork and making sure everyone had a voice in decisions. Her day went smoothly as well, though they moved more slowly than they had under Marcus's more decisive approach. Wednesday was Tommy's day, and he struggled more than the others had. He was used to working independently and found it difficult to coordinate the actions of the entire unit. They completed their objectives, but barely, and only after some tense moments when his indecision led to confusion during a time-sensitive scenario. Thursday was Sarah's turn. She woke up that morning with her stomach tied in knots. She had been dreading this day since the exercise began, watching the others lead and wondering how she could possibly command a respect and attention that leadership required. Marcus handed her the leadership armband as the unit gathered for the morning briefing. Your show now, Chun. Try not to get us all killed. He was joking, but Sarah could hear the underlying concern in his voice. Her teammates had come to respect her tactical insights, but leading was different. Leading meant making decisions under pressure, giving orders that people would follow even when they disagreed, and taking responsibility for the consequences. Sarah looked at the map they had been given and studied their objectives for the day. They needed to conduct reconnaissance on 2 enemy positions, establish an observation post overlooking a key intersection, and extract intelligence from a simulated prisoner. It was a complex set of tasks that would require careful coordination and timing. Sarah realized this was actually an advantage for her. The day's challenges played to her strengths in planning and analysis rather than requiring the kind of physical leadership that came more naturally to Marcus. Okay, everyone, she said, trying to project more confidence than she felt. Let's talk through today's mission. She spread the map out on a flat rock and gathered the unit around it. We have 4 main objectives, and they need to be completed in a specific sequence because each one provides information we need for the next. She pointed to the map as she spoke. First, we need reconnaissance on this enemy position here. But instead of just observing from a distance like the mission parameters suggest, I think we should establish 2 observation points. One here and one here. She indicated 2 positions that would provide different angles on the target. Why 2? Jessica asked. Because from this angle, we can see their defensive positions and patrol patterns, Sarah explained. But from this angle, we can see their supply lines and communication equipment. Together, that gives us a complete picture of their capabilities. Tommy nodded slowly. That makes sense. But how do we coordinate between 2 positions? Sarah had already thought about that. Hand signals during daylight, and I brought these. She pulled out 2 small mirrors from her pack. We can use reflected sunlight to send simple coded messages between positions. Marcus looked impressed despite himself. Where did you learn that? I read about it in one of the historical tactics books, Sarah replied. Civil War scouts used it when they couldn't risk voice communication. They spent the next 20 minutes going over the complete plan for the day. Sarah had thought through every detail, from the timing of their movements to backup plans if something went wrong. She assigned specific roles to each team member based on their individual strengths. Marcus, you'll lead the team to observation point 1. Your job is to assess their defensive capabilities and patrol patterns. Jessica, you're with the team going to observation point 2. You'll focus on their communication and supply infrastructure. She continued assigning roles, giving Tommy responsibility for establishing the observation post and putting herself in charge of coordinating the intelligence extraction. Questions? She asked when she finished explaining the plan. The unit was quiet for a moment. Then Marcus spoke up. It's a good plan, Sean. Detailed and well thought out. But what happens if we run into unexpected problems? Plans are great until the enemy does something you didn't expect. Sarah had been hoping no one would ask that question, but she had prepared for it anyway. That's why we're using the mirror communication system. If either observation team encounters something unexpected, they can signal the other teams immediately. And I've identified fallback positions for each team in case we need to abort any part of the mission. She pointed at several locations on the map. These are rally points. If anything goes wrong, we regroup at the closest rally point and reassess. Tommy looked skeptical. That's a lot of moving parts, Chun. What if the communication system fails? Then we stick to the timeline, Sarah replied. Each team knows their objectives and their time limits. If communication fails, we execute the original plan and adapt as necessary. They moved out shortly after sunrise, splitting into their assigned teams. Sarah found herself with the smallest group, just herself and one other recruit named David, heading toward the location where they would conduct the intelligence extraction. As they moved through the woods toward their objective, Sarah tried to calm her nerves by focusing on the technical aspects of the mission. She had studied interrogation techniques and intelligence gathering procedures extensively over the past few weeks, preparing for exactly this kind of scenario. The prisoner was another recruit playing a role, but Sarah knew the drill sergeants would be watching to see how well she handled the extraction. It wasn't about being intimidating or aggressive. It was about being systematic, patient, and smart. When they reached their position, Sarah could see the observation teams moving toward their assigned locations. The mirror communication system was working exactly as she had planned, with brief flashes of reflected sunlight confirming that both teams were in position and beginning their reconnaissance. The intelligence extraction scenario went better than Sarah had expected. She approached it methodically, using psychological techniques rather than pressure to get the information they needed. Within 30 minutes, she had extracted key intelligence about enemy troop movements and supply schedules. But the real test came in the afternoon when Marcus's team encountered an unexpected problem. Through the mirror communication system, Sarah received a signal that their observation position had been compromised. Enemy patrols had discovered their location, and they needed to extract immediately. Sarah's heart started pounding, but She forced herself to think through the situation logically. This was exactly the kind of unexpected complication that Marcus had asked about, and now she needed to prove she could handle it. She signaled Jessica's team to maintain their position and continue gathering intelligence while she coordinated Marcus's extraction. Using the rally point system she had established, she guided Marcus's team to a fallback position where they could regroup safely. Then, she made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. Instead of aborting the mission or trying to establish a new observation post, Sarah decided to turn the complication into an opportunity. "Marcus," she said when his team reached the rally point, "how many enemy patrols did you see before your position was compromised?" "3 different groups," Marcus replied. They were running regular sweeps of the area. Sarah studied her map and had an idea. Those patrols are following predictable routes. If we can track their patterns, we can use their movements to our advantage. She explained her new plan quickly. Instead of trying to hide from the patrols, they would shadow them at a safe distance. The patrols would lead them directly to enemy positions and reveal information about their security procedures. It was risky, but it worked. By following the patrol routes, Sarah's team was able to gather intelligence on 3 enemy positions that hadn't been included in their original objectives. They completed their assigned reconnaissance, and then some, all while avoiding detection. When they returned to base camp that evening, the other recruits looked at Sarah with new respect. She had not only completed all the assigned objectives, but she had successfully adapted to unexpected complications and turned them into advantages. "That was impressive," Jessica said as they sat around eating field rations. "When Marcus's position got compromised, I thought for sure we were going to have to abort the whole mission. Instead, we ended up with more intelligence than any other day this week," Tommy added. "How did you know the patrols would lead us to other positions?" Sarah smiled tiredly. "I didn't know for sure, but I figured enemy patrols usually follow routes that connect multiple positions. It seemed worth the risk to find out." Drill Sergeant Martinez appeared at their camp as they were finishing dinner. "Chun, walk with me," he said. Sarah followed him away from the group, wondering if she was about to be criticized for taking too many risks during the mission. "Today was interesting," Martinez said as they walked. "You took a significant gamble when you decided to shadow those patrols instead of playing it safe." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied. "I thought the potential intelligence gain was worth the risk." "And you were right," Martinez said. "But more importantly, you've demonstrated something that can't be taught. When your original plan fell apart, you didn't panic. You didn't try to force the original plan to work. You adapted." He stopped walking and looked at her directly. "That's the mark of a real leader, Chun. Not someone who can follow a plan perfectly, but someone who can think on their feet when the plan goes wrong." Sarah felt a flush of pride, but Martinez wasn't finished. "Your teammates followed your orders today without question, even when you were asking them to do something risky. Do you know why?" Sarah thought about it. "Because the plan made sense?" "Partly," Martinez agreed, "but mostly because you had earned their trust over the past 8 weeks. They've seen you think through problems carefully. They've seen you put the mission and the team ahead of your own comfort. And they've seen that when you make a decision, it's based on careful analysis, not ego or impulse." They walked back toward the camp in comfortable silence. As they approached the group, Martinez spoke again. "You've got 1 more day of this exercise, Chun. Tomorrow someone else will be leading. But I want you to remember what you learned today about yourself. You have leadership potential, but it's a different kind of leadership than what comes naturally to people like Marcus." Sarah nodded, understanding what he meant. Marcus led through physical presence and natural charisma. Sarah led through preparation, analysis, and earning trust through competence. That night, as Sarah lay in her sleeping bag looking up at the stars, she thought about how much had changed since her first day at the base. She had started as the weakest link, the recruit everyone expected to wash out. But she had found her strengths and learned how to contribute in ways that no one, including herself, had expected. The tattoo on her arm felt warm against her skin as she remembered the conversation that had inspired her to get it. The person who had taught her about hidden strength and unexpected potential would be proud of how far she had come. But Sarah knew the biggest tests were still ahead. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and after the field exercise ended, they would return to base for the final weeks of basic training. And somewhere beyond that, there would be real missions, real consequences, and real tests of everything she had learned about leadership and her own capabilities. For now, though, she was content to know that she had found her place and proven her worth. She was no longer trying to be like everyone else. She was learning to be the best version of herself, and that was enough. The final weeks of basic training passed in a blur of intensive exercises, final examinations, and preparation for graduation. Sarah had found her rhythm with the unit, and her confidence had grown significantly since those first difficult days. She was still the smallest and physically weakest recruit, but no one questioned her value to the team anymore. 2 weeks before graduation, Drill Sergeant Martinez made an unusual announcement during morning formation. "We're going to have a special visitor next week," he said, his tone more formal than usual. "Commander Patricia Morrison will be conducting final evaluations and presenting awards to outstanding recruits." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine at the mention of that name. Commander Patricia Morrison was one of the highest-ranking officers in military intelligence, a legendary figure who had built her reputation during conflicts in the Middle East and Eastern Europe. Sarah had read about her exploits during her tactical studies, but hearing that she would be visiting their training base was unexpected. "Commander Morrison doesn't usually visit basic training facilities," Martinez continued. "The fact that she's coming here means this unit has attracted some attention at higher levels. I expect everyone to be at their absolute best during her visit." Marcus raised his hand. "Sir, what kind of attention?" Martinez's expression was unreadable. "The kind that could open doors for your future careers, or close them permanently if you screw up. Commander Morrison has the authority to recommend recruits for special assignments, advanced training, or immediate deployment to high-priority units." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. She had been looking forward to graduating and moving on to advanced intelligence training, but a visit from Commander Morrison suggested that something bigger was happening. That evening, Sarah found herself in the library again, this time researching everything she could find about Commander Morrison. The woman's service record was impressive and somewhat intimidating. She had graduated from West Point at the top of her class, served multiple combat tours, and had been instrumental in developing new intelligence gathering techniques that were now used throughout the military. What struck Sarah most about Morrison's career was that she seemed to specialize in situations where conventional approaches had failed. She had a reputation for finding creative solutions to impossible problems and for identifying unconventional talent in unexpected places. "Nervous about next week?" Jessica asked, finding Sarah surrounded by books and printouts. "Maybe a little," Sarah admitted. "Commander Morrison isn't someone you want to disappoint." "I'm sure you'll be fine," Jessica said, sitting down across from her. "You've proven yourself here. Whatever she's looking for, you've probably got it." But Sarah wasn't so sure. She had found her place within this unit of recruits, but impressing a commander with Morrison's reputation was a different challenge entirely. The week passed quickly, and before Sarah knew it, Monday morning arrived with the news that Commander Morrison would be arriving that afternoon. The entire base was buzzing with nervous energy as recruits and drill sergeants prepared for the inspection. Sarah was in the armory, cleaning equipment with meticulous attention to detail, when she heard the sound of helicopters approaching. Through the window, she could see a small convoy of vehicles entering the base, led by a black sedan with military escort vehicles. "She's here," Tommy said, looking out the window beside her. "Think we're ready for this?" "Ready as we'll ever be," Sarah replied, though her heart was pounding. The recruits were called to formation an hour later. Sarah stood at attention with her unit, trying to keep her breathing steady as they waited for Commander Morrison to appear. When Morrison finally walked onto the field, Sarah was surprised by her first impression. The commander was shorter than she had expected, maybe 5 feet 6 inches tall, with short brown hair and intelligent brown eyes. She wasn't physically imposing, but There was something about the way she carried herself that commanded immediate respect. Morrison walked slowly down the line of recruits, stopping occasionally to ask questions or examine equipment. When she reached Sarah's section of the formation, she paused. "You must be Chun," Morrison said, her voice calm but penetrating. Sarah's heart nearly stopped. How did Commander Morrison know her name? "Yes, ma'am," Sarah managed to say. Morrison studied her face for a moment. "I've been reading some interesting reports about your performance here. Your tactical analysis during the field exercises was particularly noteworthy." "Thank you, ma'am," Sarah replied, unsure what else to say. Morrison nodded and continued down the line, but Sarah could feel her attention returning frequently during the rest of the inspection. After the formal inspection, Morrison conducted individual interviews with selected recruits. Sarah was surprised, but not entirely shocked when her name was called. The interview took place in the base commander's office, a spartanly decorated room with military maps covering the walls. Morrison sat behind the desk, studying a file that Sarah assumed contained her training records. "Sit down, Chun," Morrison said without looking up. Sarah took the offered chair and waited quietly while Morrison finished reading. "Interesting journey you've had here," Morrison finally said, looking up. "When you arrived, your drill sergeant's initial assessment suggested you would wash out within the first month. Your physical scores were among the lowest he'd ever seen." Sarah's cheeks burned, but she met Morrison's gaze steadily. "Yes, ma'am, but something changed around week 4, Morrison continued. "Your tactical scores started improving dramatically. Your leadership evaluation from the field exercise was outstanding. And your teammates, when interviewed separately, all described you as someone they would want to serve with in combat." Morrison closed the file and leaned back in her chair. "That kind of transformation doesn't happen by accident." "What changed?" Sarah thought carefully about her answer. "I stopped trying to be someone else, ma'am. I realized I would never be the strongest or the fastest, so I focused on finding ways to contribute with the abilities I actually have." "And what abilities are those?" "Analysis, planning, and pattern recognition," Sarah replied. "I can see things that others miss, and I can think through complex problems systematically." Morrison nodded slowly. "Your drill sergeant mentioned that you've been studying military intelligence procedures on your own time." "Yes, ma'am. I find it fascinating. The idea of using information and analysis to gain strategic advantage appeals to me. More appealing than direct combat." Sarah considered the question honestly. "I think I can serve more effectively by gathering and analyzing intelligence than by carrying a rifle on the front lines, ma'am." Morrison smiled for the first time since the interview began. An honest answer. Most recruits feel like they have to claim they want to be infantry soldiers, even when their talents clearly lie elsewhere. She opened another folder and pulled out several documents. "I have an opportunity I'd like to discuss with you, Chun. But first, I need to ask you a personal question." Sarah tensed, wondering what kind of personal question a commander would need to ask. Morrison leaned forward slightly. "You have a tattoo on your upper right arm. Small, discreet, but distinctive. Would you mind showing it to me?" Sarah's blood turned to ice. How could Morrison possibly know about her tattoo? It was small and always covered by her uniform. She had never shown it to anyone at the base. With trembling hands, Sarah rolled up her sleeve to reveal the small tattoo. It was a simple design, just a few lines that formed a symbol most people wouldn't recognize. Morrison studied the tattoo carefully, and, for a moment, her professional demeanor seemed to soften slightly. "Where did you get that tattoo, Chun?" Sarah's mouth fell dry as she answered. 3 years ago, ma'am. In memory of someone important to me." "Someone in the military?" "Yes, ma'am." Morrison was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah could see her thinking through something important. "Chun, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to answer truthfully. Are you related to Master Sergeant David Chun?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had spent months avoiding any mention of her family connections, trying to succeed on her own merits rather than relying on anyone else's reputation. "He was my older brother, ma'am," Sarah said quietly. Morrison nodded slowly, as if confirming something she had already suspected. "Master Sergeant David Chun was one of the finest intelligence analysts I ever worked with. He died 2 years ago in Afghanistan, during a mission I commanded. Sarah felt tears threatening, but she fought them back. This was not the time or place to break down. Your brother never mentioned having a sister in his personnel file, Morrison continued. But he wore a tattoo identical to yours. He told me it was a symbol that represented his family's commitment to service. He got his tattoo first, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. I got mine after he died, to honor his memory. Morrison leaned back in her chair, and when she spoke again, her voice was gentler than it had been before. Your brother saved my life during his final mission, Chun. His analysis of enemy positions allowed us to complete an extraction that would have been impossible otherwise. He died protecting intelligence that prevented a major terrorist attack. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, overwhelmed by hearing details about her brother's death that she had never known. I've been following your progress here because your drill sergeant mentioned your last name and your tactical abilities, Morrison continued. I suspected there might be a connection, but I wasn't sure until I saw the tattoo. She paused and studied Sarah's face. The question now is whether you want to honor your brother's memory by following in his footsteps, or whether you want to make your own path. Sarah looked up, confused. I don't understand, ma'am. Morrison smiled again. I'm offering you a position in advanced intelligence training, Chun. It's an accelerated program that would allow you to skip several years of standard progression. You will be working directly with experienced analysts on active intelligence operations. Sarah's heart started pounding again. Ma'am, I haven't even graduated basic training yet. You will graduate, Morrison said confidently. Your performance here has been exceptional, despite your rocky start. But this opportunity requires a decision now. The training program starts immediately after your graduation ceremony. Sarah sat quietly for a moment, processing everything Morrison had told her. The opportunity was incredible, beyond anything she had dreamed possible. But it also meant following directly in her brother's footsteps, something she had been trying to avoid. Can I ask you something, ma'am? Sarah finally said, Of course. Are you offering me this opportunity because of my brother, or because of my performance here? Morrison considered the question carefully before answering. Your connection to David got my attention, she said honestly. But your performance here earned my respect. I wouldn't offer you this position if I didn't believe you could excel at it, regardless of who your brother was. Sarah nodded slowly. She thought about everything she had learned about herself over the past 3 months, about finding her strengths and learning to contribute in her own way. I will be honored to accept the position, ma'am, she said finally. Morrison smiled and extended her hand. Welcome to military intelligence, Chun. I think your brother would be proud. As Sarah shook the commander's hand, she felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness about what lay ahead. But she also felt something else, a sense that she was finally on the path she was meant to be on. The interview ended shortly after, and Sarah walked back to the barracks in a daze. Her fellow recruits were eager to know what Morrison had wanted, but Sarah found herself unable to share the details yet. The conversation had been too personal, too overwhelming to discuss casually. That evening, as she lay in her bunk, Sarah traced the small tattoo on her arm and thought about her brother. For 2 years, she had carried the weight of his loss and the pressure of living up to his memory. But tonight, for the first time since his death, she felt like she was finally becoming someone he would be proud of, not because she was copying his path, but because she was finding her own way to serve with honor. Graduation was still 2 weeks away, but Sarah knew that her Real journey was just beginning. The 2 weeks following Sarah's interview with Commander Morrison passed in a strange mix of anticipation and routine. Sarah had decided not to tell her fellow recruits about the advanced intelligence position, partly because she didn't want special treatment during these final days, and partly because she was still processing what it all meant. The other recruits noticed that something had changed after Morrison's visit, but they assumed it was just the normal nervousness that came with approaching graduation. What they didn't notice was that Sarah had begun carrying herself differently, with a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. During their final field exercise, Sarah was once again selected as a team leader, but This time the experience felt completely different. Instead of the nervous uncertainty she had felt during her first leadership rotation, Sarah found herself naturally taking charge and making decisions with calm authority. The exercise was designed to be the most challenging yet, combining all the skills they had learned over the past 3 months. Sarah's team was tasked with conducting a complex reconnaissance mission that required them to gather intelligence from multiple targets while avoiding detection by enemy forces. As Sarah studied the mission parameters, she realized this was exactly the kind of challenge that played to her strengths. The exercise required careful planning, tactical analysis, and the ability to adapt when unexpected problems arose. "Okay, everyone," Sarah said, gathering her team around the mission map. "This looks complicated, but we can break it down into manageable pieces." She had learned not to apologize for her authority or downplay her expertise. Over the past month, her teammates had come to trust her judgment, and she had learned to trust herself. "Marcus, you, and Tommy will handle the northern observation point. Jessica and I will take the southern approach. But instead of just gathering the intelligence we're supposed to get, I think we should look for information about their communication patterns." She pointed to several locations on the map. "If we can figure out how they're coordinating between positions, we might be able to predict their patrol schedules and find windows of opportunity for the extraction phase." The mission went even better than Sarah had hoped. Her team not only completed all their assigned objectives, but discovered a weakness in the enemy's defensive strategy that allowed them to complete the extraction phase 30 minutes ahead of schedule. When they returned to base, Drill Sergeant Martinez was waiting with an expression that Sarah had learned to recognize as his version of being impressed. "Outstanding work out there, Chun," he said. "That was some of the best tactical leadership I've seen from this unit." "Thank you, sir. The team executed the plan perfectly." "The team executed your plan perfectly," Martinez corrected. "There's a difference. You've learned something important about leadership, Chun. You've learned that authority isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about being the voice people trust to make good decisions." That evening, Sarah found herself sitting alone on the steps of the barracks, watching the sunset and thinking about how much had changed since her first day at the base. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice someone approaching until Commander Morrison's voice interrupted her reverie. "Mind if I join you?" Sarah jumped to her feet and snapped to attention, but Morrison waved her back down. "Relax, Chun. This is an informal visit." Morrison sat down beside her on the steps, and for a few minutes they watched the sunset in comfortable silence. "I heard about your performance during today's exercise," Morrison finally said. "Sergeant Martinez tells me you're developing into quite a leader." "I'm still learning, ma'am," Sarah replied. "We all are," Morrison said. "The difference between good leaders and great leaders isn't that great leaders have all the answers. It's that they never stop learning, and they never stop trying to get better." She paused and looked at Sarah directly. "I wanted to talk to you about something before graduation tomorrow. Something about your brother that I didn't mention during our interview." Sarah tensed, wondering what else there could be to know about David's death. "Your brother didn't just save my life during that mission," Morrison continued. "He also requested something before he died. He asked me to look out for his family if anything ever happened to him." Sarah looked surprised. He never mentioned having a commander who knew about his family. David was a private person, but he cared deeply about the people he loved, Morrison said. "He talked about you sometimes. He was proud of your academic achievements, but he was worried about you too." "Worried about what?" "He thought you were too focused on trying to live up to his example instead of finding your own path," Morrison explained. "He used to say that you had different strengths than he did, but that you couldn't see them because you were too busy trying to be like him." Sarah felt a lump forming in her throat. It sounded exactly like something David would say. "The opportunity I'm offering you isn't about following in your brother's footsteps," Morrison continued. "It's about using your own unique talents in service to your country. David would have wanted you to find your own way to make a difference." They sat in silence for another few minutes before Morrison stood to leave. "One more thing, Chun," she said. "Tomorrow, during the graduation ceremony, you'll be receiving a special commendation for outstanding performance during training. It's not because of your brother. It's because you earned it. The graduation ceremony took place the following morning in front of the main administrative building. Families and friends had come from all over the country to watch their loved ones receive their military graduation certificates. Sarah's parents had driven down from Connecticut to attend. Her mother cried when she saw Sarah in her dress uniform, and her father, a quiet man who rarely showed emotion, told her he was proud of how far she had come. David would have been so proud to see this, her mother said, hugging Sarah tightly before the ceremony began. Sarah thought about that as she stood in formation with her fellow recruits, waiting for the ceremony to begin. David had always believed in her, even when she didn't believe in herself. But today, for the first time, Sarah felt like she was standing here as herself, not as David's little sister trying to live up to his memory. The ceremony proceeded with the traditional military precision. Names were called, certificates were presented, and families applauded as their loved ones officially became soldiers. When it came time for special commendations, Sarah was surprised to hear her name called first. Private Sarah Chin, the base commander, announced, for exceptional tactical leadership, outstanding analytical performance, and determination in overcoming initial challenges to become a valued member of her unit. As Sarah walked forward to receive her commendation, she could hear her fellow recruits applauding enthusiastically behind her. Marcus let out a loud whoop, and Jessica called out, "That's our Chun." But what happened next surprised everyone, including Sarah. As the base commander handed her the commendation, Commander Morrison stepped forward and asked to address the assembled crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," Morrison said, her voice carrying clearly across the field, "I want to say something about Private Chun that goes beyond her performance during training." The crowd fell silent, and Sarah felt her heart start pounding. "Military service requires many different kinds of strength," Morrison continued. "We need soldiers who can carry heavy equipment and fight on the front lines. But we also need soldiers who can think strategically, solve complex problems, and lead through intelligence rather than intimidation." She paused and looked directly at Sarah. "Private Chun represents the best of what our military can be. She came here with significant physical limitations, but she refused to let those limitations define her capabilities. Instead, she found ways to contribute that made everyone around her better." Morrison's voice grew stronger as she continued. "In my 25 years of military service, I have learned that the most valuable soldiers are not always the strongest or the fastest. They are the ones who never give up, who find creative solutions to impossible problems, and who earn the respect of their peers through competence and character." She gestured towards Sarah's unit, who were standing at attention but clearly bursting with pride for their teammate. "Private Chen's fellow recruits called her weak when she first arrived here," Morrison said, "but by the end of training, they were calling her their leader. That transformation didn't happen because she became physically stronger. It happened because she discovered strengths she didn't know she had and learned how to use them in service to something bigger than herself." Morrison paused and pulled something from her pocket. Sarah's eyes widened as she realized what it was. "This tattoo," Morrison said, holding up a photograph of the symbol that Sarah wore on her arm, "represents a tradition of service that goes back generations in the Chin family. Private Chun wears it in honor of her brother, Master Sergeant David Chun, who died in service to his country 2 years ago." Sarah felt tears threatening as Morrison continued. "Master Sergeant Chun was one of the finest intelligence analysts I ever worked with. He saved my life and the lives of countless others through his dedication and expertise. But I believe his greatest legacy stands before us today in his sister, who has proven that strength comes in many forms and that honor is measured not by what we are born with, but by what we choose to do with the gifts we have." Morrison walked over to Sarah and pinned a special insignia to her uniform. Sarah recognized it as the mark of the Military Intelligence Corps, but it was different from the standard version. This one had additional elements that she didn't understand. This is a special commendation that is given only to intelligence personnel who have shown exceptional promise during their initial training. Morrison explained, speaking loudly enough for the crowd to hear. It marks Private Chun as someone who will be moving directly to advanced intelligence training, where she will learn to use her analytical abilities to protect our national security. The crowd erupted in applause, but Sarah barely heard it. She was staring at the insignia, realizing that Commander Morrison had just announced her future to everyone present. As the ceremony concluded and families began to gather with their newly graduated soldiers, Sarah's parents rushed over to embrace her. "We're so proud of you," her mother said, tears streaming down her face. David would be over the moon to see this. Her father, typically more reserved, simply put his hand on her shoulder and said, "You found your own way, just like he always said you would." As the celebration continued around them, Sarah noticed her fellow recruits approaching. She braced herself, not sure how they would react to learning about her family connection and her special assignment. Marcus reached her first, and Sarah was surprised to see that he was grinning. "Chun, you sneaky genius," he said, shaking his head in amazement. "You never told us your brother was a war hero." "It wasn't relevant to my performance here," Sarah replied. "Like hell it wasn't," Jessica interjected, but she was smiling too. "But not because of his reputation, because it explains where you got that incredible determination. You were carrying his memory with you this whole time." Tommy nodded in agreement. "That makes sense now. I always wondered what was driving you to keep going when everything seemed impossible. But you know what the best part is?" Marcus added, "You didn't succeed because of who your brother was. You succeeded because of who you are." Commander Morrison made that pretty clear. As Sarah looked around at her fellow soldiers, she realized they were right. She had spent so much energy trying to honor David's memory that she had almost missed the most important lesson he had tried to teach her, that her value came from being herself, not from being like him. That evening, as Sarah packed her belongings for the move to advanced intelligence training, she took out her phone and looked at the last text message David had sent her, just 2 days before he died. "Stop trying to be like me," the message read. "The world needs you to be like you. You're stronger than you know, smarter than you give yourself credit for, and braver than you think. Find your own way to serve, and make me proud by being the best version of yourself." Sarah smiled as she read the words again. She had finally learned what David had been trying to tell her all along. 3 months ago, she had arrived at basic training as the weakest recruit, struggling to keep up and fighting to prove she belonged. Tomorrow, she would begin advanced intelligence training as a soldier who had found her place and her purpose. She rolled up her sleeve and looked at the small tattoo one more time. It no longer felt like a burden or a reminder of expectations she couldn't meet. Instead, it felt like a connection to something larger than herself, a symbol of service and sacrifice that she could finally carry with pride. Sarah Chun had started this journey trying to live up to someone else's legacy. She was ending it ready to create her own. As she finished packing and turned off the lights in the barracks room she had called home for 3 months, Sarah smiled and thought about the future that lay ahead. She still didn't know exactly what challenges awaited her in advanced training, but she knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, she would face it as herself, with all the strength and intelligence and determination that had carried her through the transformation from the unit's weakest link to one of its most respected members. The girl who had stepped off the bus 3 months ago, small and uncertain and afraid of disappointing everyone around her, was gone. In her place stood a soldier who had learned that true strength wasn't about being the biggest or the fastest or the loudest. True strength was about finding your own way to serve, honoring the past while building the future, and never giving up on becoming the person you were meant to be. And sometimes, Sarah realized as she walked out of the barracks for the last time, the most important battles weren't fought with weapons or won through physical force. Sometimes they were fought with quiet determination and won through the courage to be exactly who you are, even when the whole world expects you to be someone else. The mark on her arm told the story of her family's legacy of service. But The commendation on her uniform told the story of her own unique contribution to that legacy, and that, Sarah knew, was exactly what David would have wanted.